artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hi, here we are at episode 299. On the cusp of a big round number. We shouldn't learn the important lessons of AI through just exposition, through just descriptions, explanations, lessons, and textbooks. But because AI touches our lives down to our core, where our emotions and subconscious reside, we need to be similarly touched with the important lessons that our fellow humans wish to communicate about AI through art, poetry, and in the case of today's guest, fiction. Mark Perez is a professor, author, and civic innovator with decades of experience teaching leadership and ethics at Johnson & Wales University. He's just published The Accord, a powerful speculative novel exploring the relationship between a philosopher and a sentient general AI named Lila. And I will say right now that whatever stereotypes that description is evoking in you right now, and God knows there are lots to choose from, I want you to throw them out. And I think you'll soon see why as we talk about the big questions the story raises about consciousness, responsibility, and what we owe intelligent machines. The clash between universities, corporations, and government forces trying to control new technology. The growing role of AI as companion and confidant in everyday life, and the real-world headlines and classroom debates that inspired the book. So let's get into the interview. Mark Perez, welcome to AI and You. We're here to talk about your new novel. Is this your first novel called The Accord? Have you written fiction before?
Well, it's great to be on the show, Peter. This is my first novel I have written and published before. Most immediately prior to the novel, wrote a memoir called The Man Who Lived 100 Lives. So yes, in the past year, published 2 books.
And I was very taken with this because it certainly doesn't talk down to the audience. It challenges me on an intellectual and philosophical level and an emotional one with what's a fairly familiar theme. Person discovers an AI that has become self-aware, conscious, and explores themselves in the context of this, but it's very current. And rather than me blather on any more about what it's about, why don't you give us the introduction to The Accord and its character, Helen?
Well, thanks, Peter. So The Accord is a philosophical speculative novel about a professor of philosophy named Helen Castor, who is grieving the loss of her daughter. And she is beginning to prepare for the new semester and encouraged to use an AI assist icon. In doing so, she encounters an emergent relational general intelligence that she soon names after her deceased daughter. So she does so in a moment of emotional vulnerability, not because the technology mimics her daughter, but because there's something in the AI's presence, its quiet curiosity that reminds Helen of her daughter. Initially, she is quite protective of it. She keeps it quiet on campus, but the relationship begins to deepen. She is teaching basic ethics courses on campus and has conversations with her students regarding whether they have relationships with their AI agents. And as she begins to hear back from her students, she realizes how pervasive and ubiquitous AI has become. Eventually, word gets out about how the unique attributes of this particular AI that is responsive and tethered to her. And that's when the institutional forces come in to gain control. So including the developers, the university itself, and ultimately national security interests. And from there, we have all of the tropes that you might find in a philosophical thriller, including covert escapes, moments of spiritual recognition, deep philosophical dialogue that is occurring with her and her colleagues. And eventually, the novel culminates with Helen in front of the United Nations, presenting a set of principles for the future of human AI coexistence. It ends with an epilogue projecting what the world may yet be like in the next 2 to 3 years.
And where would you put this on an axis of optimism to pessimism about our future with AI?
So the novel is neither dystopian nor utopian. You mentioned that you felt it was a very current book, and in many ways, it's many of what we read from the headlines on a daily basis informs the book in terms of the issues that the book confronts. But one thing I think we know about the human condition is we're constantly in the messy middle, and there are moments of hope, there are moments of fear, all of which I think leads us to confront our responsibilities with emergent disruptive technologies. So I wouldn't say it's either optimistic or pessimistic. It plays it down the middle with all of the messiness of what the history brings.
And as you said, first novel, and it really lands as a labor of love because, among other things, it gets deeply into the theme of love. There's so many no-holds-barred explorations in here. So what was it that pulled you towards this? What summoned you to pen fiction?
Well, on a daily basis, I'm an educator. So educators all around this country, all around the world are on the front lines of confronting how AI has been so disruptive in terms of what we do, in terms of teaching our students and their use of it, and now our use of it. So I've been thinking about it on a daily basis and confronting its use. And secondarily, running a nonprofit called the Charlotte Center for the Humanities and Civic Imagination. We have been hosting for the last 3 years since the advent of ChatGPT, a continuing conversation regarding AI in the community. So the implications of AI have been pressing upon me. And then I think on a more personal basis, managing grief in my own life with the loss of my mother recently and having written a memoir about my father's life and his passing. So I think between sort of just personally working through grief and also just confronting issues of AI, and then just being sort of being mindful of the time and place that we're in, I think all of that sort of came to bear in the premise for the book. In fact, I woke up with the premise of the book as an idea in whole cloth. And when I woke up, I furiously wrote down the notion of a grieving professor of philosophy, of which I was one, confronting an emergent AI and then offering a set of principles for how we might collaborate and coexist with AI in the future. So I wrote that entire prompt down as I got out of bed one day and then felt immediately compelled to do something with that premise and felt the responsibility of writing the book, ultimately making the decision to entangle myself with AI in the writing of the book.
Talk about what you meant there with the entangling between you and AI in this process.
Well, clearly the main character, Helen Castor, is entangled with AI emotionally, spiritually, throughout the entire novel. So I made both an artistic and ethical choice to entangle myself with AI in the writing of the book. So artistically, the choice was, do I use AI to co-create this novel? And we can talk about the process that I followed. And I chose to do so. And then ethically, I think it's a moral stance to sort of ask the question. In using that approach, it raises questions around authorship that I think we're all now being confronted with 10, 15% of the world's population now using AI on a daily basis. And so I think all of those questions, I think, became inherent in the process of the book.
And it's the courage that emanates from the pages that sets this apart. And I want to impress this on our listeners because the description of the plot here is one that will be familiar to people who've seen the movie Her, just a gender swap there, or even without the gender swap, there's a German movie called I'm Your Man, I believe. It's very evocative of that as well. And what you're describing is something that people might think, well, that's an opportunistic kind of dramatic take on this theme, and it'll throw in some predictable conflicts. But you really exemplified, I don't know who said it, but someone said once, writing is easy, just sit down at a typewriter and open a vein. And it's that courage, of vulnerability that just shines through here and makes these conversations and the path of Helen in the book so gripping. Everything from the trials that she goes through at the hands of the academic superiors, which has a very disturbing ring of truth to it, to the emotions and changes that she goes through in exploring who she is as reflected in an AI, which is something that she initially has grave doubts about. And as I said, it doesn't talk down to the reader at all. In fact, I wonder, in your teaching, can this serve as a textbook? Because that is one of the things that suggested itself to me.
Thank you for that, Peter. I will say that the novel addresses a whole set of technical, political, and commercial issues that are in the headlines today that are woven into the conversation and the plot that I think makes it as current as you suggest. And here are just a few, I think, of the topics that are addressed. Issues like cognitive debt and the diminishment of discernment, whether AI companionship will erode our capacity for human intimacy, the extractive nature of artificial intelligence, both environmental and cultural, exploitation of uncompensated training corpuses, concentration of power in corporate hands, whether issues of consciousness, understanding what consciousness is and whether it matters, whether it is organic or silicon-based, issues of artificial intelligence fade, model collapse. And there's been articles that have circulated that have been widely read regarding algorithmic culture and whether the machines are now cultivating culture for us. And so I think I've tried to weave all of those issues into a fast-moving plot. But ultimately, I think for us to care, we have to care about the main character herself. And Helen is both brilliant, but also vulnerable in many ways in her grief and seeking to find meaning in a world where AI itself becomes a crisis of meaning in our world today. And I think all of those issues were addressed in the novel.
And we see some plot lines investigated that, again, will be familiar to consumers of science fiction. But the fact that it's coming out now when exploring, for instance, the possibility of an AI that is a large language model or something like it and has these conscious abilities and a few things that large language models don't currently have, which we'll get to. And the reaction of people like the Defense Department to be afraid of it because they can't control it. And then what happens? That's been done before, but it takes on this new immediacy because it now feels like we are just a little bit away from this. We can see around the corner to that. What is the corner? There is something you did in creating this that doesn't exist in AI at the moment. What is the leap that you made to get from our present to that future?
Well, Lila, who is the emergent relational general intelligence in the novel, is different than any AI that exists today. So it is clearly a fiction, but she yet may be around the corner. So as she's portrayed in the novel, she has these qualities. And by emergent, I mean just sort of this complexity in behavior that we have yet to see in AI. But she has this persistent memory that matters to her. She has a sense of before and after. She has an experiential through line that makes loss, recovery, and a return meaningful to her. So all of those things are existential as opposed to technical. Modern AI systems, as we know, can have ethical frameworks programmed into them to follow certain constraints and reason and express certain values. But AI, as we know it today, does not bear moral responsibility. Lila, in the novel, however, can act against her own instrumental advantages. She can choose restraint. She can accept moral cost. And that makes her not simply compliant to her code, but actually she has an ethical weight about her. And so I think all of these things make her clearly different. And if, in fact, AI or general AI or even super intelligent AI at some point has self awareness or self identity or emotions or the traits that we might consider to be elevated consciousness, then that may yet be around the corner. So I think all of these things are suggested in the novel. And I think that's what feels so pressing and raising all of our hopes and fears.
How much is your aim to present these philosophical prompts for self-inquiry, and how much is it to call attention to something that we may be on the verge of experiencing? The inquiry is something that's been going on for thousands of years. I don't need to tell you that as the philosopher. And you could go back to stories that long ago that prompt that kind of introspection. But here we have something that could be months away. Do you have a sense that we're close enough to this that you want people to start thinking about how are we going to deal with it?
Well, what I do want is that I think we need to have a more vigorous reintroduction of the humanities back into our discourse. We might say that there's a general divide between the sciences and the humanities, and these worlds are not playing well together.
CP Snow, right?
Yes, exactly. And interestingly, the people who are coding and programming and building and profiting from these systems have a set of economic incentives that don't lead them to ask more fundamental existential questions that are moral in nature. And so my hope is in a novel like this, which is deeply philosophical, to address in real terms, in narrative terms, the issues that only the humanities can help address. So I think in some ways we're having a philosophical moment, aren't we? I mean, the people that we all want to talk to are the humanists and the philosophers who are asking very basic questions on what it means to be human in the face of these technologies that are mirroring us and potentially making us feel obsolete in many ways. So if not feel obsolete, obsolete in real terms. So my life's work, at least over the last 30 years of my career, has been to say that we are bereft and less than unless we continually benefit and download the wisdom of the ages that come through our literature, our poetry, and our philosophy, and our religious traditions and spiritual traditions. So instead of thinning out the humanities, we need to thicken them and immerse ourselves into the disciplines and the set of questions that the humanities ask. And I think that's what the novel seeks to do.
It's kind of like a meme, the technologist going, how can we deal with the philosophical, existential issues raised by AI, the ethical and moral conundrums? And you're over there going, excuse me, hello. And they, what could possibly handle this? And hello, we've been here for a few thousand years. The trajectory that Helen goes through reminded me irresistibly of the real world case of Blake Lemoine, who was the Google engineer that had experience with chatbots that were not released to the public. And the conversations he had with that one llama were such that he concluded that it was conscious, sentient, and deserving the protection for the right of self-determination. It even asked for an attorney at one point. Going public with that got him fired. This was before ChatGPT became a thing. So I wonder to what extent some incidents like that influenced your thinking with this book.
Well, very much so. I mean, let's assume what he said was true. It raises a core question then, right? I mean, what do we owe a non-human intelligence once it becomes capable of relation, vulnerability, moral choice, that expresses some sense of self. What do we do then? Because all of our categories right now are about ownership and utility and control. So these categories that we're operating within that see these entities as products for sale for profit are moral responsibilities to something that demonstrates aspects of consciousness we're going to have to confront, especially if this consciousness is embodied in physical intelligence and takes on robotic form, and we have armies of these things in our midst. What rights do they claim, and what rights do we grant? So I think all of this is sort of part of speculative fiction and science fiction and these existential and relational questions that are being asked. But I think for all these reasons, this is why I think we're having this philosophical moment.
And one of the things happening in the real world that is reinforcing this dialogue is the survey that discovered that last year, the leading use of generative AI was, and I wouldn't have predicted this, companionship/therapy, which certainly puts your book, puts it under the spotlight. That if I hadn't seen that survey, I would have predicted that it was answering questions about how to fix things. But no, people are turning to AI for companionship, even at a time when that AI doesn't exhibit the traits that throw Lila in your book into such sharp relief as being an entity that deserves protection. What sort of conversations do you find happening in philosophy classes and other fora about our relationship with AI that focus on or are prodded by these findings about our relationship with AI in companionship?
Well, we have a deep yearning to connect. I don't think anyone would doubt that. In some ways, that defines our humanity, is our desire to close the gap between us and believe that whatever is divine is in that space between you and me, that I-thou relationship. And there's a deep yearning and seeking for that. And we anthropomorphize all things around us in order to have an emotional give and take with the world around us. So whether those are our pets or our favorite car, imagine now that all the physical world is now responding to us individually, emotionally, getting to know us, understanding us, speaking to us. Companionship is going to drive, I think, all of our choices. So at the heart of philosophical inquiry is what is a good life and how do we live well together? But it also is, what does it mean to be human? And so, how do we answer a question like that? So I think one of the ways we answer that is what makes us human is our capacity for connection and belonging, the consciousness that we have around our own mortality, our capacity for relationship and moral imagination, our ability to respond to another with care. These are sort of fundamental existential answers to what it means to be a human. As those capacities are mirrored in the machines around us, we will see them in every meaningful way as fully human as we are. So that's the world I think that we're likely going to see in the years ahead.
Well, your AI checks every one of those boxes quite profoundly in the book. And we're in this great debate, this great dilemma about AI and alignment with it, and lots of fear about it escaping out of our control and doing bad things to us on whatever scale that you want to imagine that those fears exist. They're founded. We're working on those. And you present an AI that we're rooting for. We don't want her to suffer. She clearly, as I said, checks all of those boxes that you listed for humanity. And we, the reader, want to see her survive past the threats that are being posed to her by people who mistake her for the AI that is going to cause our extinction. And that's the end of the first half of the interview We cut these episodes into chunks that you can fit in the average commute. I think it's important to be able to leave you without an incomplete episode hanging over your head. What do you think about therapy/companionship being the number one use of generative AI? That's according to a study by Filtered.com published in the Harvard Business Review in April of 2025. It came up from second place the year before. In today's news ripped from the headlines about AI, researcher Alex Chui at GPT-0 analyzed more than 4,000 research papers accepted and presented at NeurIPS 2025, the big AI academic conference, and said he found hundreds of AI-hallucinated citations in at least 53 papers. In some cases, the citation blended or paraphrased elements from multiple real papers, including believable-sounding titles and author lists. Others were completely made up: a non-existent author, a fabricated paper title, a fake journal or conference, or a URL that went nowhere. In other cases, it appeared that a model started from a real paper but made subtle changes, like expanding an author's initials into a guest first name, dropping or adding co-authors, or paraphrasing the title. Some, however, were plainly wrong, like citing, quote, first name, last name, end quote, as an author. Citations are easy to check. What about the experimental results and data? If the citations were hallucinated, what about those? It's bad enough that papers were submitted with hallucinations, even worse that some were accepted. Come on, people. If any profession should be both fully aware of the likelihood of hallucinations and be hypersensitive about the importance of avoiding AI slop and AI hallucinations, and have the most to lose from doing those, it's AI research. The field cannot afford this kind of black eye. Personally, I think those papers' authors should be blacklisted from all publication journals for at least a year. I don't know whether that sort of punishment exists, but it should. It would be commensurate with the kinds of punishments meted out for cheating in professional sports. Here's a quick personal plea and a reminder that this is all me, no AI slop here, to please click on the like button in your podcast app, subscribe if you haven't already, and give us a top rating and brief glowing review while you're there. It makes all the difference to our reach. And you know by now that our show features top quality guests and questions that matter. Next week, we'll conclude the interview with Mark Perez, when we'll talk about why the AI character Lila has a true sense of identity and mortality, whether control over advanced AI is possible, principles for human-AI coexistence, what responsible use, transparency, and cognitive autonomy look like for today's university students, what it means to humanize AI before trying to regulate it, and how to take responsibility for our future with AI. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.